On a personal level, most of us find AI to be very useful for answering complex questions or writing out our favorite recipe in an instant. But for the average business user, AI is a double-edged sword. It can be very helpful in writing your emails or summarizing a lengthy document, but at what cost? Does turning on Copilot expose your company to data risk? Let's take a look together at what it could look like to secure AI in your corporate infrastructure. Hey guys, Ryles here from MicroAge. AI is the buzzword of the century, and I think you would agree that it's incredibly valued both in our personal lives and in our business lives. But the truth is, with all the value we get from using it to summarize our emails and write our documents, there's a little bit of risk that comes when we turn on AI in a corporate environment. Partly because our users don't fully understand how to use it, and partly because our environments weren't quite created with the knowledge that AI was going to be scanning everything in them. So what I thought we'd do today is look at 5 ways that there's some risk in our environment when we turn on and leverage AI. And then we'll take a look at 3 different best practices we can follow to secure those environments just a little bit and reduce our liability. So let's kick it off. The very first risk I want to mention is what I call mismanaged permissions. So the truth is that large language models can scan your environment if you've turned it on to do that, and find any file or information that you have been given permission to access with your user account. So whether you're using Google Workspaces with Gemini or you're using Copilot with Microsoft environment, if anyone has ever shared something with you over the last many years, you're gonna have access to the content of that file. Oftentimes we don't think about when we share files with people that we're gonna add to that document later, and that person's gonna have access to all the later added content. Whereas we might not even remember all the files that have been shared with us over the last many years, your LLM will find it and can then answer questions about it. And we need to keep that in mind as a risk when we think about our employees scanning with prompts the contents of the files that we have in our environments. The second risk we need to remember is users might upload confidential files or data to a public large language model. I'll give you an example of a financial analyst who took a financial spreadsheet with corporate information for a privately held company and uploaded it into their public ChatGPT account and asked it to summarize the content. Well, of course, it did a great job giving them a summary of the document, but now because it's a public version of ChatGPT in your private account, it's likely going to use that data in order to train the large language model, making that data now available to anyone in the world who asks for information about your company. So a lot of the users simply don't understand that this is how it works, and so we need to educate them, but it is absolutely a risk. The third risk I want to think about is that users oftentimes rely on inaccurate AI-generated content. A famous example is the attorney who wrote a brief for a judge and used a LLM to write the brief, and it made up case law that never even existed to make a point. And so in that situation, the judge read the brief and just realized that case law didn't exist and disbarred that attorney. That's just one example of many, but oftentimes I think we will use like our engineers to write technical documentation or content, and a large language model might make up some steps that aren't actually how a product works. And if you're not reading and scanning and double checking all the different instructions or output of AI generated content, you could find yourself in trouble. The fourth risk that I oftentimes see with AI is what I call shadow AI. So this is the idea that your employees may be logging into public LLMs that you don't approve of with your corporate email address and using them. They might be even charging large language models to their corporate credit card without you knowing about it, using LLMs that are not authorized by your organization. Shadow IT is a problem in the same way that shadow IT is. So shadow AI is going to continue to grow in our organizations unless we implement tools and solutions that lock down what your employees can use and what they can't in terms of tooling, and we'll talk about that in a minute. The fourth risk I like to think about is prompt injection. Now, prompt injection is a couple of things. Number one, it's the idea that your employees can be creative in how they write prompts to try to get around your security or your policy. So you need good security products that can identify prompt injection and mitigate against it. But prompt injection can be more insidious than that. It could be downloading files or images from the web that have code and malware baked into them so that when you upload those files into your large language model, it can instruct your LLM to do things you didn't intend for it to do. That is also prompt injection. So out of these 5 risks that are kind of scary, what are we supposed to do? Not use AI? Well, that's really not a good option. So I want to provide 3 ideas on best practices companies can follow to try to secure their environment and reduce their liability when using AI. And the first one I think is the most important, and that is data governance. Now, data governance is kind of a large category, but I'm going to talk about 2 different ways to think about it. First of all, it's important that we classify and label all the files in your environment before you turn on a large language model like Gemini in a Google Workspace environment or Copilot in a Microsoft environment. So the idea of this is very simple. A tool can scan your entire environment, look inside of your files, and identify any files that might have social security numbers or salary information or other types of PII, personally identifiable information. Maybe it's healthcare record data, and you can classify that document as maybe healthcare related or confidential or secret. And so when we classify and label our documents, now you can write policies for your AI tools that will prevent users from accessing documents of a certain classification level that they shouldn't have access to. Now, this isn't a simple project, and there's lots of great tools that can help the process of data classification and labeling. If you're in a Microsoft world, start with Purview. That's a great way to think about labeling and classifying your documents. But there's other tools that can make that exercise a little bit easier. Tools out in the market like Varonis or Sierra or Big ID. There's lots of different examples out in the market to do this type of thing. The other part of data governance is inspecting all the permissions on the files that are in your environment. So for instance, if I identify through labeling that I have a file that is healthcare related data, let's look at the permissions of the file to make sure people that should not have access to that sensitive data don't have access. So there's a lot of tools out there that I mentioned before that can scan your environment, looking at permissions, analyzing it for your labels and classifications, and let you double check and review all the permissions of the environment. Because remember, an LLM is going to give an employee access to whatever information they have access to through permissions. So locking down your permissions in your environment is a big task, but a really important one. The second best practice I would mention is to deploy an AI security tool. And there's many of them on the market, some of which are getting gobbled up right now by some of the bigger vendors. I won't mention products specifically here, but if you want to know some of the products that we recommend, I've analyzed about 6 or 7 of them on the market so far. We're constantly looking at the new technologies. What I can tell you is there are 4 primary ways that AI security solutions do what they do. And I want to mention these 4 to you in order of least intrusive to most intrusive. So the least intrusive mechanism AI security products are architected to do what they do is to use a proxy service. So if you already have Zscaler in your environment, or maybe Cloudflare or Palo Alto Prisma Access, FortiSASE, Cato Networks, the idea is that you're funneling all network traffic off your servers and endpoints up to a cloud service where you can analyze it for security threat. Well, these AI security companies oftentimes will allow for proxy chaining, which means if your data is already going to Zscaler, from Zscaler, you can proxy chain it off to an AI cloud service to be analyzed if it's AI specific traffic. So traffic bound for ChatGPT or for Copilot or for Perplexity, you might filter off of Zscaler off to an AI cloud security service, and they will analyze that traffic to see if you're uploading files you shouldn't or asking questions you shouldn't in your prompts, and then send the data and result back to Zscaler and then back to your endpoint to then block access through your browser. So proxy chaining is a great way in a non-intrusive way to provide AI security. A second and related mechanism is using group policy objects to deploy policy to the operating system that will have DNS proxy settings. So I can use DNS to try to identify any network traffic on a device and redirect it off to an AI cloud security service. So in the same way I could do it through proxy chaining, I could just at an OS level detect any traffic bound for Claude as an example, or Gemini, and I can redirect that to my AI security product to be scanned for threat. The third most intrusive version of AI security is a browser extension. So very easy to do. I can deploy a browser extension to all the Chrome or Firefox or Edge browsers, Safari out in my infrastructure, and then through a browser extension, if the extension detects any AI traffic through the browser, you can redirect that off to an AI cloud security product to be scanned and analyzed and follow your policy. And then the browser can block access to a prompt or to file upload or whatever as necessary. So this is a good solution, not very hard to deploy browser plugins to your infrastructure. And then the fourth option, and probably the most intrusive, but arguably the most complete or thorough, is to install an AI agent on an endpoint. And that agent is able to intercept all types of AI traffic on an endpoint, not just browser traffic, and it can detect it and then send it off to an AI cloud security solution to be scanned and analyzed. So if you have the ability to deploy through a mobile device management solution, an AI security agent down to a device, then that's another good option. So deploying an AI security product is a great way to, number one, prevent files from being uploaded to public LLMs that they shouldn't be. Number two, make sure your employees are locked down so they can't use an LLM that you don't authorize. Number three, you can lock down the questions people ask through a prompt to make sure they're not asking for sensitive information and that kind of data is blocked. So an AI security solution is a great example of how to reduce risk in an environment. And the third best practice I would mention is write an AI security policy. So oftentimes employees just don't know what the best practices are. You need a policy written that says we allow Copilot and we don't allow Gemini, or vice versa. Whatever your policies are, you want to document them and have your employees read through it and educate them not to upload files to a public large language model, because that information might be available to the public after that. People just don't know. It's up to us to educate them. So speaking of education, I hope this video has been helpful for you to understand a little bit more about how great AI can be, but there are risks we need to think about and best practices we need to follow. So until next time, I'll see you again for our next Cyber Byte video. Thanks.